A record number of bills relating to health care, access to bathrooms, even drag performances have already been tabled this year in state legislatures.
Senate Bill 15 would ban transgender athletes
from competing in sports at the youth level.
It's the bill banning transgender transitioning for children.
House Republicans have now passed a bill that would ban transgender girls from competing in female athletics.
There's only two genders, male and female. Trust the science.
Tonight, a ban on transgender athletes in college sports is poised to become law.
A full-on attack on the rights of people in the community.
Outright banning gender-affirming care for transgender minors.
The bills spread misinformation.
The bill says transgender females cannot participate in sports that correspond with their gender identity.
The Kentucky General Assembly passing a sweeping anti-trans bill.
Kentucky GOP lawmakers succeed in getting anti-trans legislation to the governor's desk.
This is not good government.
Nearly 500 anti-trans bills have been introduced in states across the country this year alone. They target everything from books and drag shows to gender-affirming care, access to bathrooms, and even just speaking about the existence of trans people in schools. The issue of trans rights, which affects less than 1% of the US population, has become the central rallying cry for Republicans. Through concerted, strategic efforts to use trans rights as a wedge issue, conservatives have fear-mongered their base into a frenzy in an attempt to win votes and win elections, all at the expense of the health and physical safety of a tiny group of marginalized people, mostly children, just trying to live their lives. These anti-trans bills are not about protecting children. They're not about fairness in sports. They're not about safety in public restrooms from potential groomers. What they're really about is a vocal, radical minority weaponizing fear and disinformation among the electorate to win votes, gain social media followers, and increase their political and social power. And this has been going on for decades, uniting the religious right to conspiracy theorists and white power extremists, and igniting widespread fear based on threats that do not exist. This is why conservatives are so obsessed with trans kids. Roll the intro. Let me thank my partner on today's video, Warby Parker. I think the thing that I get most compliments on are my glasses. I switch back and forth between these tortoise shell frames and these gold boys, and I actually have these gold boys in two different styles, one for reading and one for distance, because I can't be stopped, okay? I've been getting glasses at Warby Parker for years, okay? Warby Parker is committed to providing exceptional vision care online and in stores, offering eyeglasses, sunglasses, eye exams, and contact lenses, okay? They also have options like blue light filtering lenses. That's what I always get, because you guys, we stare at screens so much throughout the day, and I've noticed fewer headaches from switching to the blue light filtering glasses. Glasses start at $95, including prescription lenses, and you can try Warby Parker's free home try-on program. You order 5 pairs of glasses to try on at home for free for 5 days. There's no obligation to buy. The try-on glasses ship free and include a prepaid return shipping label. You can try 5 pairs of glasses at home for free by going to warbyparker.com/Legia. Now, I'm always looking to freshen up my eyewear, so I got myself a home try-on kit, and I'm kind of looking for something a little bit more masculine today, so let's see. I've been looking into a lot of black frames lately, so we have a couple options. We've got this one, or we've got this pair. This pair I feel like makes me look like a scientist. What do you think? Okay, then I have another kind of simple but little nerdy pair of glasses. Like if I were like a librarian or a professor, this might be the vibe. Or these guys, which are kind of like retro and fun. I really like these. What do you think? And now you can save 15% when you buy 2 or more pairs of glasses or sunglasses today. And if you prefer shopping IRL, Warby Parker has 190 retail locations throughout the US that you can visit. Go to warbyparker.com/Legia to order your home try-on kit for free today. Thanks, Warby Parker. It's impossible to talk about the anti-trans movement coming to fruition in the Republican Party without also talking about homophobia, anti-feminism, and racism at the same time. The issues are interconnected in our history, and the current flurry of anti-trans bills is simply a culmination of the perfect storm of many disparate movements coming together at the same time. But this has been a long time coming.
Jesus loves me.
Anita Bryant was once known as an orange juice saleswoman. Not anymore. With a religious fervor that has made her America's most controversial woman overnight, she has been selling her Save Our Children group. Her group is crusading to repeal a new Dade County law which protects homosexuals in jobs and housing. Anita Bryant began her fight at her church, where the congregation believes the new law will force them to hire homosexual teachers.
Anita Bryant was a singer who had a handful of pop hits in the 60s and toured with Bob Hope, performing holiday shows for troops overseas. She sang at the White House numerous times, and she was the spokeswoman for the Florida Citrus Commission, appearing in commercials for orange juice. She was also a born-again evangelical Christian on a mission to restore good Christian American values in the United States. In 1977, in Dade County, Florida, of all places, the Dade County Commission approved a law that would outlaw discrimination based on sexual orientation in employment, housing, and public services. News of the ordinance spread quickly, especially among the Dade County evangelical churches, of which then 36-year-old Anita Bryant was a member. Specifically, apparently, a police sergeant came and made a presentation to the church members about the dangers of homosexuality and showed them gay and child porn to, I guess, expose the wicked ways of homosexuals. At this point, the idea that gay men were predators to young boys was already a tale as old as time, but it hadn't gotten a national platform. Not yet, anyway. Anita Bryant was understandably horrified because she hadn't ever met an out gay person, nor did she know anything about the gay community, and she had 4 children in schools and was particularly concerned about the gays infiltrating the schools as teachers. If this sounds familiar to the video I made recently about communism and the fear people had that communists could be infiltrating every nook and cranny of society, including, God forbid, your children's schools, that's because it's the same tactic, different decade. Especially once you hit the 80s and the fear that your child could be infected with AIDS, yeah, things got bad. When you have an entire electorate who hasn't knowingly come into contact with the marginalized group of people that are being regulated, it's easy to spread whatever kind of misinformation you want. Anyway, so Anita's horrified, and she decides she has to stop this anti-discrimination bill from passing. Her and a group of churchgoers form a coalition called Save Our Children, and everyone votes in Anita as president. Their goal? Get 10,000 signatures on a petition to have a county-wide referendum on whether to keep the anti-discrimination ordinance. The group campaigned extensively, including showing people homosexual pamphlets and claiming that they were being distributed in grade schools to recruit kids to the gay agenda. They weren't, with Anita at the helm at one point holding a press conference to say that Dade County homosexuals are trying to recruit our children to homosexuality. A statement based on zero facts or evidence, but that was enough to foment fear in the local population, and the group managed to get 64,000 signatures and bring the referendum to a vote. The results were overwhelming. It was the largest turnout in any special election in the history of Dade County, and voters supported repealing the anti-discrimination ordinance by a margin of more than 2-1. Based on the resounding success, Anita continued the mission of Save Our Children on a national scale, making it the first national anti-gay group, and began traveling around the country advocating for people to repeal gay rights laws and think of the children. At one point at a press conference in Iowa, a gay rights activist threw a pie in her face in protest, so she prayed for him. Through all of this, she genuinely thought she was doing the Lord's work, and she repeatedly said that she didn't do this out of hate or homophobia, she did it out of love for the homosexuals. Anita, this ain't love, girl. What happened to you to make you think that? Why do you believe in a God who would show love in that way? Anyway, even in the 70s, a lot of people were like, this woman is nuts. She was the butt of jokes nationwide, including by former tour partner Bob Hope, and by 1980, she was completely out of work in showbiz, having lost her brand partnerships because of her anti-gay work. She had divorced her husband in 1979, for which she received extreme backlash from the church. After seeing what it was like to be on the receiving end of evangelical hatred, her views on the gays conveniently softened a bit. At one point she said, "The church needs to be more loving, unconditionally, and willing to see these people as human beings, to minister to them and to try to understand." Oh, interesting, Anita. Why is it always conservatives who are incapable of empathy unless it is literally happening to them? Anita's still alive. She's 83 and lives in Oklahoma. And in a twist of karmic irony, Anita's granddaughter, Sarah Green, came out publicly on a Slate podcast in 2021 by announcing her impending nuptials to a woman. Boo. The national scale of Anita's campaign in the 70s was a galvanizing force that some historians point to as the beginning of the culture wars. Prior to the founding of Save Our Children, the religious right really didn't have a strong foothold in American politics. Reverend Jerry Falwell, then the head of a megachurch in Virginia, took a large role in assisting in the Save Our Children campaign in Dade County and would go on to found, along with political activist Paul Weyrich, the Moral Majority in 1979, a coalition of fundamentalist religious groups working on a national scale to influence politics. Through widespread voter registration, fundraising, and utilizing the media to inform voters about the cause and their version of the truth, the Moral Majority was able to play a large role in getting Ronald Reagan elected president in 1980, solidifying the religious right's outsized role in politics and presidential elections that persists today. Since then, the religious right has fixated on social issues like abortion, religious-based education, LGBTQ rights, and parents' rights. These issues form the ideological bedrock of the religious right and turned evangelicals into a fervent and cohesive voting unit, one that became so powerful despite its small size in relation to the US population because of how fervently they show up at the polls. In his book, The Next Conservatism, Paul Weyrich, the co-founder of the Moral Majority, wrote that the goal was to weed out cultural Marxism and restore a non-ideological American republic, which is what we had until the wretched 1960s. You know, that decade where civil rights were won for millions of Americans. At the same time, throughout the 1980s, anti-gay fear-mongering reached a fever pitch, with religious right groups like the Moral Majority calling AIDS the gay plague and calling it God's will, while tens of thousands of people died from the disease. Throughout the 80s, a man named Paul Cameron, a former psychology instructor at the University of Nebraska, was publishing pseudo-scientific pamphlets proving that gay people commit more serial murders, molest more children, and intentionally spread diseases. Despite being expelled from the American Psychological Association in 1983 for ethics violations, Cameron continued to produce bogus studies widely cited by anti-gay groups. Since then, however, as the United States has grown more diverse and more progressive, the bedrock foundation of the religious right has been slowly chipped away. First, it was anti-sodomy laws aimed at making gay sex illegal. Those were officially done away with in the 2003 Supreme Court case Lawrence v. Texas, which was a galvanizing force that became obsolete with the Supreme Court's Obergefell ruling in 2015, legalizing gay marriage nationwide. And while there are still evangelicals who are mad about the gay marriage thing, the vast majority of Americans are in favor of allowing the gays to wed. It no longer has the ability to whip the electorate into a fear-mongered frenzy like it once did. But the religious right still had one thing. They still had abortion. Pictures of tiny fetuses, heartbeats, and fingernails in the womb. These ideas still created a fervor in the religious right, enough to get them to show up to the polls at far greater numbers than any other voting bloc. And thanks to the tireless work of the religious right since the 1970s, inserting religion into politics and requiring pretty much any Republican who wants to be president to appeal to the religious right since Reagan onward, they finally got the person they had always dreamed of in the White House. Donald Trump. An orange muppet who would say and do whatever it takes, with impunity, to gain more followers and power. He rallied the religious right, and he put in the judges necessary to make real legal change in this country. And he paved the way for Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health to make its way to the Supreme Court, giving them, many of them being recently appointed by Trump, another chance to finally do away with abortion protections across the country. A real victory for the religious right, who are dead set on protecting fetuses, but fuck parents and fuck kids once they're out of the womb, especially if they're black or brown. But then the religious right ran into a pesky little problem. All of their traditional wedge issues, abortion, gay marriage, gay sex, they'd all been done away with, either solved in the case of abortion or no longer the galvanizing force that brings people to the polls like they once were. And so the religious right had to change course, and quickly. Back in 2016, after the gays were allowed to wed, the religious right was like, what new thing about the gays could we get people whipped up into a voting frenzy about? Well, we've kind of exhausted our options with the L and the G. The B, I don't know, do bisexuals even really exist? They're also sometimes hetero, so like probably fine. And then what's the next letter? Oh yeah, T. Wow, now T is an interesting option. There'd been some national headlines in recent years that had brought trans rights to the forefront in a way that had never happened before. Laverne Cox played a main character role in Orange is the New Black starting in 2013, becoming the first openly trans person to be nominated for an Emmy in an acting category, and later the first to win the award. Chelsea Manning's Lake of sensitive documents and transition while going through the legal process made national and international news, and her sentence was commuted by President Obama in 2016. In April 2015, Caitlyn Jenner came out publicly as a trans woman, appearing in a 2020 segment and on the cover of Vanity Fair magazine as the first out trans woman to appear on the cover. So trans visibility was having a moment, and as with any progress, there was, of course, some backlash. But it took the conservatives a bit of time to get it right. They started with bathroom bills. In 2016, again, the main motive to get them to the polls is fear. So they thought, hey, what if we told people that trans women were really just men in disguise as women so they can go into women's bathrooms and attack you? Yeah, that'll get them riled up. In 2016, North Carolina legislators voted to bar transgender people from using the bathroom that didn't correspond with their assigned gender at birth. The backlash was swift and harsh from corporations, sports teams, and even Bruce Springsteen, so that lawmakers eventually rescinded the bill. Because bathroom bills are dumb, y'all. Men who want to attack and assault women aren't going to be dissuaded by a law that says you can't enter a woman's bathroom. Like, I'll rape and murder, but going into the wrong bathroom, that's where I draw the line. And people kind of knew that. And the issue, while popular with the fear-mongering Fox News crowd, really didn't get people riled up in the way that conservatives knew needed to happen for them to turn out in droves and vote. So, advocacy groups began polling to determine whether curbing transgender rights had resonance with voters, and if so, how to best talk about the issue. Because again, this has never been about protecting children or about Christian morals. It's always been about power, getting elected and staying elected. And polling found that, in particular, voters were significantly more likely to support a Republican candidate who favored a ban on transgender girls participating in school sports than on transgender people using bathrooms, especially if the issue was framed as a question of whether to allow men and boys to compete against women and girls. It's common knowledge in political polling and analysis that the form of a question matters, and that in order to get unbiased results, you need to frame the question in a way that doesn't lead the pollee to a certain outcome or conclusion. However, the opposite can also be weaponized by politicians. So instead of asking, should trans girls compete on girls' sports teams, which is almost obvious in its outcome, trans girls sports team makes sense. Instead, they frame it as, should boys compete against girls? The insinuation being that trans girls are really just boys in disguise. And the obvious answer to conservatives with strict ideals of the gender binary is no. Of course not. That wouldn't be fair. So you're framing the question in a way that determines the outcome, but then letting the person reading the question feel like it was their own idea, that it was unfair. Using these findings, conservatives ran with the approach of barring trans kids from competing in sports, because according to the research, that's what got voters riled up. And then that quickly snowballed into the think of the children rallying cry that is so popular amongst conservatives, which then led to questions of children being turned trans in schools. What books are being taught in our schools that need to be banned? And wait, why are kids even transitioning and playing sports for a different gender to begin with? Think of the children. And we should probably ban those medical procedures because they seem wrong. And voila, the conservatives had themselves a new wedge issue that would once again galvanize the voter base and get them to turn up in the polls. In March 2020, Idaho became the first state to bar transgender girls from participating in girls' and women's sports, which was called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. And 1 year later, Arkansas became the first state to enact legislation making it illegal for minors to receive transition medication or surgery. This legislation was based on model language first used in South Dakota that didn't initially pass there, but created the framework that was then used nationwide to curb trans rights. The model language was created by lawmakers in cahoots with religious right-affiliated groups, including the Child and Parental Rights Campaign, the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Phyllis Schlafly-founded Eagle Forum, and a fringe conservative doctors group that calls itself the American College of Pediatricians. Email exchanges obtained by Mother Jones show members of these groups pushing lawmakers in South Dakota to make the laws more restrictive and to ensure that the language was ironclad. At least 18 states have introduced legislation with language mirroring the original model bill created for South Dakota, and the religious right has helped establish a sophisticated playbook to get this legislation passed, including pushing disinformation, utilizing the conservative media to instill fear, and even capitalizing on the handful of vocal people who have have detransitioned and now are a powerful tool for conservatives, hoping to show that because this one person regrets having transitioned, then all of trans affirmative care is bad and dangerous. These anti-trans bills are not popping up on a state-specific level from local grassroots movements trying to create laws in their own state. It is a nationwide, concerted, and strategic effort by outside forces who want to come in and influence state elections. And while it is very common and truly preferable for lawmakers to consult with experts on the bills that they're writing, that becomes a very different story when the experts are spouting pseudoscience, largely motivated by a specific religious doctrine that they'd like to impose on everyone, and working in concerted, strategic ways throughout the country. The result of this effort is a dramatic rise in anti-trans bills, with nearly 500 winding their way through the legislative process this year alone. This despite the fact that a 2021 PBS-NPR Marist poll showed that 2/3 of Americans oppose bills limiting the rights of transgender people. However, these bills, of course, aren't posed as limiting the rights of transgender people. They're pitched as securing rights for women in sports and as protecting children from woke indoctrination and grooming. And these talking points and fears have their root both in the bedrock of the religious right, but also in the growth of white power movements since the election of Donald Trump. Remember last week when we talked about book bans and how Nazis burned tens of thousands of books to symbolize a new, clean, reborn Germany? Well, a lesser-known fact about Nazi book burning is that a significant number of books that were burned were part of the library of Jewish sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld, whose Institute of Sexual Studies was the first clinic in the world to provide surgical interventions allowing trans people to live in the bodies they wanted. The institute opened in 1919 and provided care and sought to dispel shame around same-sex relationships and gender nonconformity, as well as publishing path-breaking research into trans affirmative care. And nearly a century later, white nationalist horror at gender nonconformity and hatred towards trans people remains at the center of far-right movements in the United States. A post from July 18, 2021 on the neo-Nazi blog Occidental Observer by open white supremacist Andrew Joyce is an example of this. In the post, he attacked both Magnus Hirschfeld's activism on behalf of LGBTQ people and a 1934 book that condemned racism in all its forms, saying, "Love as a concept was altered and weaponized by Hirschfeld, who imbued it with transcendental and cosmic qualities in an effort to distance it as much as possible from biological reproductive drives. Racism, homophobia, and transphobia, which together essentially boil down to the idea that whites should be able to live normally and by themselves, are perceived today as beyond the sphere of this deified love and are therefore representative of a kind of modern heresy." Basically, gayness, gender nonconformity, and anti-racism are seen as an attack on the existence of white people. This is a stark example of how racism and transphobia are intertwined in the modern white power movement. Gender nonconformity threatens their worldview, one that is fixated on immutable and antiquated gender roles, where white women are seen as walking wombs that must be used to replenish the declining white birth rates and reverse replacement of the white race by non-white children. The desirable qualities in a woman are chastity, submission, and silence, and the vitriol and hate being spouted on far-right neo-Nazi chat rooms and blogs is often reiterated and given validation by Fox News hosts, prominent influencers spouting disinformation and pushing the narrative that LGBT people are child groomers, like Libs of TikTok, a Twitter account with over 2 million followers, and via speeches by Donald Trump, where he either blatantly espouses the same values or gives the Proud Boys a nod and a wink on national television. Writer and researcher Talia Lavin sums it up well in a recent article, writing, "What the far right proclaims through explicit street violence, it wants to reinforce with the implicit violence of the state. Bills that seek to suppress anti-racist education, anti-trans legislation that seeks to codify antiquated gender roles, and the severe and continual restriction of abortion rights in states with right-wing legislatures typify the ways hatred of gender nonconformity, a desire to control women's bodies, and racism intermingle." As a result of this, the last 2 years have been the deadliest for transgender people, especially Black transgender women, with nearly 1 in 5 of all hate crimes motivated by anti-LGBTQ bias. Trans Americans are 4 times more likely to be victims of violent crime. 86% of trans or non-binary youth reported in a 2022 survey that they experienced negative effects on their mental health stemming from the political debate around trans issues, and nearly half had seriously considered suicide in the past year. Because again, say it with me, it's never been about protecting children. So why are conservatives so obsessed with trans kids? Because they're an easy scapegoat and a new way to once again fearmonger their base into turning up at the polls to vote. And And what can you do about it? You have to be more stubborn than them. You have to show up to vote, especially in local elections where this is happening. You have to get into the ear of your lawmakers, your city council members, your school board members. Be relentless. The power in the conservative movement, especially in the religious right, is that they're active in local politics and they show up. So you just need to show up more. If you liked this video, you'll also like my last video about why conservatives are obsessed with banning books. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially my newest and royal patrons, and thank you especially to multi-platinum patron Brett Piontek. If you'd like personal content about my dog, show notes, and behind the scenes stuff, sign up over on Patreon using the link below. Thanks so much for watching, have a good day, bye-bye!